Well, thank you everyone for joining the Early Stage Therapeutics panel at Digital RESI March. This is actually the very first session of the entire conference, so very excited to have such a great panel with and a lot of variety in this panel too, actually, from some VCs, corporate VCs, and pharmaceuticals. So I think it should make for a very well-rounded discussion. I'd also like to especially thank Joao from Novo Seeds, who will be moderating the session. And I will actually turn it over to Joao now, and he will get the panel started. Thanks again.
Thanks again, Claire. And for the people that are listening in, we'll be taking some of your questions to the panel. So just use the chat or the Q&A field, and I'll try to keep an eye there. And welcome everyone to who's listening, and also to the panel members here. I thought that we can just start with a brief round of introductions. So I'll start myself. My name is João. I'm a senior associate at Novo Holdings within the Novo Seeds team, and we do early stage investments as well as building biotech companies. Maybe through the order that I have here on my screen. Ivan, do you want to go next?
Yes, hi, thanks for this opportunity. My name is Ivan. I'm a senior associate at Inkiv's healthcare team. So Inkiv is an innovative venture capital firm based in Amsterdam. We are supporting European early stage companies in the tech and healthcare sectors. So within the domain of healthcare, we're focusing on therapeutics, medical devices, and digital health opportunities. And as I said, so we're predominantly investing in European companies.
Megan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Subrat. I am a transactions lead in the California office of Johnson & Johnson Innovation, or as I'll call it, JJI. The JJI is a group within Johnson & Johnson that's really focused on external and early stage innovation. And we engage with opportunities and companies in a variety of ways. Could be company incubation at one of our 10 global JLabs locations, venture investments, all the way through strategic partnerships of varying sizes and scopes. My personal background, I'm a scientist by training, and before Johnson & Johnson, I spent time in an early stage therapeutics company myself in the immuno-oncology space.
Thank you, Megan. Catello, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. This is Catello Somma. I'm a molecular biologist by training with an MBA in finance. I'm an associate at TVM Capital based in Munich. TVM Capital is one of the oldest European fund, 35 years of experience, hundreds of IPOs, and we are actively investing in innovative early stage opportunities, pre-IND stage, single assets, as well as late stage opportunities ready for pivotal trials. Nice to meet you.
And Chris, finally.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Haskell. I run the Open Innovation Center for Bayer in San Francisco. I'm a cellular immunologist by training. And open innovation is similar to what JJI is doing. We focus on emerging innovation of both academics and biotechs, and identify the partners, establish the partnerships, and then run the alliances or the programs themselves. Bayer's focus areas are oncology, cardiovascular disease, including cardiorenal and lung, women's health primarily. And then we're also very interested, especially in early technologies in cell and gene therapy, looking to help support these indication spaces as well as adjacencies to them. We have a lot of different ways we interact with early startups, or with biotechs, probably the focus for this panel. Be happy to talk about them today. It includes things like sponsored research and licensing. We work very closely with our corporate venture team, LEAPS, as well as our BD&L teams to bring the whole suite of different types of partnerships to play.
Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone. Because we have this very nice split between a more traditional VC role and a pharma role that includes not just potential venture investments, but also other ways of accessing an external innovation. I just wanted to start, and maybe I'll start with Megan. What does large pharma look for in a company?
Yeah, so I guess if we look through sort of a funnel type of view, I think first for us, it needs to be a company and opportunity where the focus is on our business strategy. So, and our business strategy evolves over time. but it really needs to be aligned in our key areas. You know, as Chris outlined for Bayer, kind of high level, our focus areas are still broad: oncology, immunology, cardiovascular and metabolic, you know, retinal disease, as well as technology focused areas, and some opportunities in sort of drug supply chain as well. So is it on strategy? Then is it transformative? We, you know, want to look for opportunities where, you know, it's something that we wouldn't necessarily do ourselves or be able to be experts in ourselves, but really find the people that are experts in new and novel approaches to really bring something transformative to the clinic. And then we want to see, is it differentiated? Not only is it transformative, but how does it stack up against the competition? And I think ultimately, as we get sort of narrower into that funnel, we also want to see that you have a strategy to de-risk your technology over time. Is there a path forward to kind of assess it? Does it work? How does it stack up against that competition? And it's really that flow of how we kind of initially triage and look at opportunities.
Thank you, Megan. And I already see that there's probably quite a lot of things where there's an overlap with traditional VCs, but maybe I'll let Ivan talk about the way he looks at companies.
Right. So I think, of course, a traditional standalone VC, it's really important to understand that we have to make money for other people too, right? And we have to find the best ways to do that. So when you think of things we look for in a company, of course, first of all, we look for a potential to create a product, that can bring significant value, or at least, to see the promise of such a product. Of course, there needs to be a coherent story behind this project, right? So we need to see clear objective value. We need to see that this is addressing a solid unmet medical need, ideally, right? And just as Megan said, we need also to see that there's ways to de-risk the development, because it's most of the cases it's not a short journey. It's more of like a transatlantic sailing with stops at different islands to stack up the provision and gas before you reach the final destination. And liquidity is almost never in view. So it's really important to understand how you think through the multiple steps of this project. And I think it's the burden is particularly high for the early stage companies, because they have to kind of think that through, and it's not always easy. And of course, it also needs to be realistic in terms of the capital deployment point of view. So it has to be doable with the venture capital money, right? Because if it takes a few $100 million for a neurodegenerative therapy, that is just something that is not liftable for us as VCs. And so those maybe are 4 key elements. I just also want to give another dimension of that. You can also look at this from the perspectives of technology, team, and the aspect of investability, which I'm happy also to cover later on if needed. That will be my key points, Raul.
Thanks, Ivan. Catello, do you want to add anything to what Ivan has just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm pretty much in line with what Ivan said. Just want to ensure that having a budget in mind and the conscious use of the capital by an entrepreneur is not just to do less against the quality. I mean, the quality is a must here. The data are crucial in order to let us to decide if it's worth spending 25 million in order to reach a proof of concept or not. And the other important aspect to consider is that if the molecule, the asset is going to be a best in class, not the first in class, I mean, just to ensure that the data package is strong in order to support confidence that this is going to replace the current standards, right?
Thank you, Catello. And I think that from all the three of you, I understand that there's some degree of things that are shared. So everyone's looking for differentiation, for something transformative, but there's some difference that I've noticed is that maybe for more traditional VCs, they're driven mostly by return on investments. And that may not necessarily be the case for a pharma company where there's some strategic investments. So Chris, maybe the question for you would be to, when you interact with companies and you decide to either invest in these companies or put them through some open innovation challenges, what is the key return for your company?
Yeah, well, that's the good thing about being in research is we're not a profit center. We don't ever pretend to be one. So it is about long term, right? Bringing value to the patient, and of course that brings money into the company if done right. But especially working with really early companies, and especially ones that have technologies that we're helping, we'd like to work with them to de-risk or to understand the value. It's really important that we are working with the company in a way that helps build their value, not just having them do a project that works for Bayer. And we've had ideas of working with startup companies where it really wasn't in their best interest because it might have diluted sort of their advancing to the next critical step. And so we don't enter into those collaborations. It's important that they're going to be able to build on the technology in a way that they can let other people know that they're working with us, right? And so I think it's, especially working, we have an incubator too in San Francisco, working with these very earliest companies that have just a handful of people. Their human capital is such a strong resource. We think about that, about the fact that they need to be doing experiments that are helping validate their technology and build the company. Getting back to the value proposition or how we invest, we do have a corporate venture arm, and I agree with, I think where you were leading with this is that they have, being a strategic investment arm, the LEAP group really does have a longer term view on the technology, and is less focused on return on investment. It's really not a metric that they're measured by. It's really about access to technologies that gives Bayer a first mover advantage or an ability to work with the team.
Thanks, Chris. And I guess because of that, you don't look at collaborations with pharma companies just in the form of an equity investment. You have many other ways of interacting. And you just mentioned that there's an incubator space. Still, maybe with you on the mic, just wanted to understand in which scope do you interact with different startup companies, and what are the tools that you have at disposal to make those happen?
Yeah, we have, I think the traditional sponsored research and licensing type of deals, and sponsored research might be more, again, validating a technology. It might be testing whether we want to bring an actual compound into the program. We've done this with a company that's a drug delivery company, and so we actually tested on a tool compound, and we'd only enter into the licensing part of the deal if we want to bring in the real asset. And again, it gives them the ability to publish and do more work on that initial experiment. Then we also are creating a larger swath of programs that are not financially motivated at all. We have mentoring programs. We have in the East Coast, we run our regulatory mentoring program. On the West Coast, we're setting up one on biotech manufacturing. And really, the whole point here is just to give input to companies that are seeking knowledge in areas that are somewhat arcane for most academic startups, being either manufacturing of biologics, drug substance, or regulatory. And again, this is just a way to get more involved in the community, make sure people are doing the right experiments, and build relationships and trust.
Megan, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, definitely. I think Chris has hit on some really key points that we look for too. And it's ultimately, how do we build the best relationship with a company, from the outset, and also think about what that relationship looks like over time, right? Each company's needs, both business needs and their stage of the science, requires something a little bit different. And so that's all part of the conversation. When we're talking to an early stage company, what are they looking for from us? Where is the stage of the science? When can we bring in something that's complementary to what their objectives are versus taking more of an incubation approach, keeping an eye, building that relationship early on, and then revisiting if there's a strategic collaboration later. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal, and I definitely think that as companies come to us, it's helpful to get a sense of, how the company themselves think that they could benefit from a relationship with us, and really start that conversation so we could set on a model that would be mutually beneficial.
Thanks, Megan. Maybe I'll jump now to the traditional VC side and try to get Ivan's opinion on when and why should you involve a corporate venture capital firm to join some of your syndicates, so involving some of our colleagues here.
Right. Well, just to follow disclosure, of course, I've been in the industry for a bit more than 2 years. So of course, I haven't seen everything, right? But importantly, I heard different opinions on the role of or let's say impact of involvement of corporate venture capital arms in deals, and some people were saying that, well, you have to be careful with that, but with our own experience, with Incap's investments, and we have quite a number of co-investments with CVCs. It was quite positive. It's just what we see, that the level of, let's say, the thickness of this Chinese wall between the CVC and the mother company in each particular instance, it's different, right? And there are CVCs that are seemingly really independent of their mother companies, but there are also those that involve their R&D teams, their business development strategy teams, and it's also it's very helpful. So, and very often this actually expertise that the CVCs can bring in, it's very useful, especially for early stage companies. So that is why, at least personally, I haven't seen a case, at least so far, where involvement of a CVC has negatively impacted the future of the company. I mean, of course, you have to recognize that whenever a CVC invests, this happens for a specific reason. And by the way, the motivations of a CVC versus that of other stakeholders, of other investors, may be different, because CVCs may invest because there's a particular target, or maybe some specific focus on a technology, while I don't know, other investors, they rather see it as a general platform. Of course, it's especially from the management perspective, I think you need to really realize that people may have different agendas, but it looks like that in many instances it's really working productively. And especially when there's a number of, let's say, CVCs together, it's not just one CVC, people find, they align, they agree, they have to find agreements on the path for a company. So bottom line, yeah, in our experience, it was really positive, all the interactions. So that's why I would now at least not advise a startup, a company, against partnering with CVCs, because I really see a lot of value there.
Catello, I don't know if you have a similar opinion to Ivan.
Yeah, just wanted to add here that I mean, the CVC is an important component of the ecosystem, because I mean, they can open up their internal resources to provide elements of mentorship, elements of a critical review of specific scientific aspects, for example. Although it's true that on the downside, there are some limitations, because in the end, I mean, if you are already strategic into playing, you want to ensure that you can keep the flexibility and certain degrees of independence as a VC, but also as an entrepreneur. On the other hand, I mean, a CVC is very often linked to a lead institutional investor's VC side, and therefore also keeping a defined balance between the two angles, it's very important. So just to ensure that the lead VC is also is motivated in driving the technology and the platform through, and also, I mean, advocating for the best decision to be taken by the company, let's say. Also, I mean, it's true that the contribution of the CVC could be what I said, right, in terms of the network and so on. But also another aspect is that the traditional VC is also more playing on innovative models here, where they can also bring their own network, their external experts, and very often, like us, I mean, a strategic relationship with the big pharma. So it's a case by case for sure, but the message is that the ecosystem is evolving, so an entrepreneur should take this under consideration when reviewing the different opportunities on the table.
Thank you. And I think this is a good segue talk about a recent publication that just got out in Nature Biotech that looks at the influence of having large pharma investors within companies and seeing whether they do better or worse than other companies. And the key message is that it appears that when large pharma is involved as an investor with this company or in other ways, that there's a higher chance of success for that particular company. So maybe I'll start with the protagonists of this question. So either Megan or Chris, why do you think these companies are doing better than the companies that don't have the participation of pharma companies?
Chris, go ahead.
Oh, no. It's like who unmuted first. Well, in many ways, and if you just look at, and again, I read the paper, and one of the questions is also whether the the companies that have the pharma partners are also the ones that are more naturally aligned in a path towards delivering something that's going to be transactable to the partner in the end, right? I mean, I know from my experience of working with a large number of startup companies, there's some that continue to work on a value proposition and maybe can go a long time on grant money and continuing to pivot, but just haven't resonated with finding something that actually is a value to the end user, right? In this case, being the farmer, if that's their customer. Yeah, not putting it real concisely there, but it just, again, there definitely seem to be a lot of companies that have developed a strong value proposition, have tested it through talking to their customer, which is in this case the pharma company, and are working to develop that value proposition, which then leads to transactions happening. And then I think that just perpetuates. Sorry, Megan, go ahead. I'll stop.
No, I completely. I think that article is particularly interesting. I think because we don't know necessarily, this association appears to exist, that startups that have some large pharma organizations have a slightly an advantage or a slightly advantaged trajectory. And I think that each case by case is going to be different as to reasons why. How has the pharma contributed to that trajectory of the company specifically? But there's also an interesting perception component that I think is also very true, and that while I think we do contribute, we do come in with a goal and an assessment of companies. We see so many early stage companies, and when we sort of pick some and invest in a formal relationship there, we feel confident based on everything we've seen that there's a potential commercial path here. And I think the perception component comes in is that outside investors and others that are entering this space, seeing a formal relationship with a large pharma company can seem quite validating. I mean, I think ultimately when we look at early stage therapeutics and technologies in general, and if you think about an exit, there's usually a large pharma company that's involved in some way, whether that's an acquisition or even on the path to IPO. Many of those are enabled by a large partnership. And so having that formal buy-in and sort of a large pharma company formally putting their hat in the ring, I think there's a perception component that's really validating and can help with the sort of key opinion leader question that many startup companies get asked.
And I'll just add to that one step and then give up the mic here. The other piece is that, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, just having worked with a pharma company, you understand how to talk to them, what they expect. I think the whole way you're able to interact with other potential partners totally transforms, because you've at least gone down that road once, and we all kind of have similar, in general, ways that we approach things.
Thanks, Megan and Chris. It seems that, in your opinion, it's sort of validating that you have such a broad view of the world, and when you decide to invest in some companies, it sort of validates that company is going into the right directions, is showing the right things, and in a sense, myself, Ivan, and Cattell are maybe not doing such a good job, but figuring out that all of the ones that have that potential. So maybe with that, I will kind of challenge maybe Cattello to kind of give his opinion on why this is, and whether we should just give it to our pharma folks, and they should do investments for us.
No, thank you for that. I mean, thank you for the challenge. So In fact, when we designed our investment strategy, we thought that we can effectively work with big pharma players to gather their insight and their know-how in terms of therapeutic area expertise and really the asset management rather than or the co-creation of a solid clinical design plan together with us, right? The clinical development plan with us. And then, in addition to that, what we can bring as a VC is a light speed decision-making process together with a very deep and thorough analysis of what's next, right? In terms of wave of innovation rather than in a kind of global product strategy fit, this kind of stuff. Because one of the limitations that we found in the past, I have to say, was that the pharma players were looking at the need for today, right? Just to fill up the pipeline with the late stage opportunities in order to have better hits and reach the goal of having NCs per year launched. But for us here is more a co-creation, I have to say, where we can collaborate effectively together in order to do things at a higher speed with keeping the pharma level high quality.
Ivan, do you want to go next?
Yes, I would like to zoom in particular on two aspects. So first on the importance, let's say, of discriminating different therapeutic areas and the role of partnering with pharmas with respect to what can they bring as per each therapeutic area, and also to talk about the public markets. So let's start with the therapeutic areas. I just think that there's some projects. I think it's really difficult to deliver those without large pharmas, superpower or expertise in fields such as neurodegeneration or cardiovascular trials, because there you really, I mean, if you're not able to transact, I don't know, a cardiovascular drug company, I know, post phase 2, you'll have to go for the trouble of funding the phase 3 trial. But if you have someone early on who's committed to support the company, for bringing this through massive trials with thousands of patients, I think that gives you way more confidence that this is, well, possibly can happen, right? And the same, I think, principle applies to, I don't know, Alzheimer's disease or autism. So all these difficult diseases where you can actually see the real readout, the meaningful endpoints in late stage development. So it's really good if you have someone's help from the very early on. And then think about the public markets perspective. And I think it's especially important in these days because you see that the public markets are extremely active, right? And just even among the companies you see lately, those that are relatively advanced, the management starts asking themselves, well, should we really go for VC funding? Maybe, it's just such a good opportunity for, going public right now. Maybe we should do that. And I think that is also highlighted in the publication made by Generation Ventures that the market capitalization of the companies who had pharmas as their partners is significantly higher than that of their counterparts that didn't have. And I think especially for the public market investors, it's really important to see those signs of support, that kind of validate the credibility of a certain technology or a particular drug. That just again gives more confidence. And I think so once again, citing the really hot market conditions, I think it's really important. So that's why I think it really makes sense to approach it from this perspective. What else? Yeah, I just wanted to maybe as a last point stress that there's of course different ways how you can get this relationships with pharmas. There's really different collaborations, and CVC investment is just one form, but there's licensing, co-development, and it is really, really important to understand what you want to achieve with each respective partnering. And I actually really like, for instance, what J&J does, because well they they've been historically the one who had a variety of different models in terms of their offerings. It's really broad, spanning from the very early stage collaborations, all the way to the late stage. And I see that the buyer is catching up with this as well. So that creates a diversity, and I think it's really important to understand this diversity. That would be my point.
Can I just follow up with something that Catelo mentioned? I think was really important. And that's the concept of I think a tolerance for risk that a venture investor will have. I mean, in venture investing, you expect most of the programs to fail, and the money gets made with the few that have really higher level of returns. I mean, in traditional ventures, it depends a bit on each firm to a certain extent. In a pharma company, you have these internal state. Every project is hoped to succeed or expected to succeed. I mean, we know we're in the failure business, but every program we go into has internal champions that really feel like this is going to be the one that succeeds and helps them move things along. So I think there's a mental difference in the approach, and this gets back to the tolerance for risk that Catelo mentioned, and that pharma companies usually are bringing in programs that solve a problem for right now. Usually we don't have the bandwidth for sponsored research, at least at Bayer, where we're doing hugely exploratory new technologies or platforms. That's why we have a venture arm too.
Thank you. And I just want to encourage once again the participants to ask questions if they have any. We don't want to just be talking amongst ourselves. If you have any burning questions, feel free to drop them here and under next to the chat function on the Q&A, and we'll pick some of these up. Just to recap, I feel we've realized now that for the people that are listening now, there are these two types of players that they can reach out to help develop their companies. There's the more traditional VC that has a set of advantages, and pharma companies that can place equity investments, but there's also ways of interacting. And then I guess ultimately it will depend on the risk profile, on what you're working. So maybe in the next question, I would like to understand from each one of you, what is your perspective and how do you think entrepreneurs and companies can be better prepared and make a compelling case to each one of you? And we've discussed a little bit in the beginning, what do you wanted to see, the differentiation, so on and so forth. But maybe here we can try to be a bit more specific for the people that are listening to us. What is it that you would like to see? And maybe we can start with Catelo.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for sure, the mechanism of action and all the supporting knowledge around the specific target is a key. And then after, I would look at the declination of this mechanism of action within the context of the current treatment algorithms to understand if we are going to combine the asset with the standard of care, or is going to be versus the standard of care, or is in combination with the emerging technologies which are now in the clinic and close to be approved. And then in the end, it's about the experiments that the company is conducting. If these are I mean, coming from academia, or and therefore, I mean, there will be a need for external validation of these experiments. And then after that, the IP, of course, I mean, is the common ground where we can play with expectations on the return, on the length of the clinical studies before to go on the market, and to see where this is going to peak. So these are the elements, without going into details, that are very important for us to look at, and I would encourage the entrepreneur to go straight into these things, right?
Megan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the elements are similar. You know, I know that we're looking for a lot of details on the science. I mean, generally, when you come in and you meet with one of us and our stakeholders internally, there's definitely a scientific emphasis, and that's our expertise, and we're very interested to sort of start there. The other sort of large area of our expertise, of course, and why a lot of companies do partnerships with large pharma is our commercial capabilities and our marketing capabilities down the line. And I would say because we have such expertise there, I think from really early stage opportunities, it's helpful to see a little bit of a vision in terms of how the entrepreneurs are thinking about moving an asset into the clinic. But I think for us, there's maybe a little bit less emphasis there. Helpful to know your perspective, but we would also put sort of our own commercial strategic perspective onto that. So we would sort of take it and inform us. But I think, for us, the area where we really want to see unpacked, in addition to the science, is the competitive landscape. What else is out there? How are you guys different? And or what is the path to the few critical experiments to showing how it's differentiated? And I think sometimes, when entrepreneurs approach us, and I have probably made this mistake myself, the assumption, pharma companies and the individuals you're talking to are pretty knowledgeable, as is the case with traditional VCs as well. But we still do need you to kind of tell us why you're different. You're the expert in this particular area. And I think I probably have made the assumption that pharma companies and those individuals would connect the dots themselves, whereas, it really is much more effective to go ahead and take that step, show your vision all the way through in terms of the differentiation aspect.
Chris, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, just to briefly add on, maybe it's obvious, but have a really good non-confidential data package, because we don't want to sign a CDA as the first step. We want to, that's definitely a hurdle that we want to get past to make sure. Try to be as tailored as you can to the people you're approaching. First of all, make sure they're in your therapeutic area. And then, if you know that, for example, you got something that would complement, say, a suite of programs that Bayer has in prostate cancer, that's nice to know, because that's probably an area we're focused in. And again, it shows you've done your homework and you've thought about the clinical path and how it's going to benefit us. Because I think, as Megan pointed out, we're not always as quick as we maybe should be with these things. And yes, that's good for now. I'll pass on to Ivan.
Ivan, I think a lot has been said already, so maybe I will tailor the question a little bit to you, and maybe if you can give your opinion on the impact of the team and what do you want to see there, and when do you think there is a need to add something else to the team?
Okay, so there are different requirements to the team depending on the stage of the company or an opportunity, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to have a stellar team or you have to have a CFO from the very beginning, right? Which some companies do for some reason sometimes. But even hands-on VCs, they really need someone to drive the project from the very beginning, right? And so that is why, for instance, for a seed company, it can be, I don't know, anybody. It can be a founding scientist, but it should be someone who really wants to push this forward. And okay, we may, help the person by pulling the other management members from our network, but we need the driver, right? And the more late stage you go, of course, the more requirements there are, and they have to be tailored to each particular challenge that the company will face soon or rather soon. So say, I don't know, it's a Series B investment with an outlook on, going public in 2 or 3 years from now. So I think it's a good time that you should have a CEO that should be ideally capable to get the company public. You need some, CFO person who knows how to do it on the financial side. So ideally, like, all the necessary people should be in place in terms of the product development and all the programs and so on. So that is like a continuum, and the further you go, the more requirements are there to have the full suite in place. But again, as we discussed, early stage therapeutic options, I'm talking right now about all the founders, the people who are behind the ideas. Don't think that you need to find a super experienced CEO early on. You just need to show the promise, of the technology, of the idea, of the business case, and the rest people will be able to help you with.
Thank you. And I think there's a common thread here is that companies don't necessarily need to show the results for literally everything. They need to show this promise, and they need to show that there's a plan and they thought about a plan, not just for now, but in the future. So if you're an early stage company and you've shown that you thought about what the clinical trials are going to look like and where your thoughts are, even though you're super far from that, that gives confidence to the investors around the table that you've thought through the challenges and that you've crafted a plan that can work. So it's not necessarily what you have now, to a certain extent it is, but what are the thoughts you have on how you're going to take your company from A to B. We just had one question here from Marie Hayes, and it's a pretty loaded question because it's I think hard to answer. And her question is, what is the equity expectations when major investments is arranged? So when there's a major investment placed in a company, and I don't understand what the ranges are, but let's imagine that is a 50 million euro or dollar plus investment. What do you think is the equity expectations there? So I guess we're trying to figure out how much is the founding team expected to have. And I don't know who, I'll just leave this question open because I know it's a tough one, and then I'll see if there's any volunteers to answer. Otherwise, I'll just pick someone.
I mean, that's a tricky one. I think that, ultimately it's really contextual, right? So how much money are you trying to raise versus what's the current valuation of your company? So pre-money valuation, how much you need to raise, and then sort of what that combined metric is. And that's sort of the rough back of the envelope in terms of how much equity you might need to have available. And I think that, there's a judgment call for entrepreneurs as you go forward as to how early stage you are, what your current valuation might be, and then how much to raise. Some companies take the strategy of trying to raise a really large amount of money in one fell swoop. And others take a more stepwise approach of raising, $5 million here, then another 10, then another 10. So that's my non-answer, but hopefully providing a little bit of context in terms of how to think about it broadly.
Sorry,
I can tell you something around the disease model and how we assess it. Okay, for us is considering late stage opportunities, and therefore you have to come with a solid validation and acceptance of your model before to let us gain confidence on a possible investment. But in general, I mean, what is the common ground here is that you have to generate evidence that what you're doing is differentiating, is really crucial based on your promises that you are going to test novel therapeutics. I mean, given the fact that you came today out of my mind, I mean, are you the first one since ever doing this kind of things, or just incremental technology? I mean, these are the questions that then are reflecting the valuation, right? So it's always a case-by-case approach, but it's not per se discriminating this kind of approach compared to a CAR-T, right? I mean,
Chris and Megan, maybe this is a good question for the two of you, and I'll just repeat the question again in case you haven't seen it. It's basically to talk a little bit about how you look at enabling technologies. So not the traditional small molecule antibody, traditional target, more these enabling technologies. What are the differences when you look at these compared to the more traditional programs? And I'll leave it up to you. I don't know who wants to start.
I wanted to make one quick follow-up point to the last question. I was just quickly kind of clarifying, when we look at venture investment, that's typically with an equity lens. Strategic partnerships don't necessarily take an equity component. Often what the selling feature there is actually intellectual property rights. So venture investment is typically equity, and then strategic partnerships, we provide some financials in exchange for some access or future access to intellectual property. So wanted to mention that, but I think to the subsequent question, enabling technologies, we we're definitely interested in enabling technologies. And so, we think about categories of where we're active. There are assets, maybe a particular small molecule or particular antibody, for example, that has a target and is moving linearly along the path to the clinic. But then, particularly in the early stage space, we see a lot of new platform technologies, new approaches. I think someone on this panel mentioned a drug delivery technology, for example. I think, Chris, you mentioned that perhaps. Those are all areas of high interest. How do we are there technologies to get more drug to the right place in the body for the therapy, for example? And we actually have a specific group within J&J. They're called Discovery Product and Drug Supply, or DPDS. That's really our discovery arm that supports the therapeutic areas. And they're the ones that are experts in these technologies, thinking a little bit further down the line of what's kind of the newest thing or what will come in the near future. So those are definitely of high interest for us.
I can just add on to that briefly. I think that there's both a great opportunity here and a great challenge with platform technologies. The great opportunity is that we can work with you in a very non-dilutive way, because with an asset, especially if you have just one or two small molecule compounds against like RAS or something of high value, it's really difficult to partner very early with pharma because we don't know what the upside is, right? And so how you split the value of that asset when it's so risky in the early stages is difficult. With a platform technology, we can do a program with you where maybe we're even, in the end, would take a license just for a very small component, one indication space, a few targets. So actually, it's in some ways they're attractive because we can be very aligned on creating value together without you losing the upside of your company. The downside of the whole technology piece is that even though we are looking for next generation technologies, often we're looking for you to solve a problem we have right now. And often that problem is hard because we haven't solved it with any other one. And so sometimes we're throwing you our most difficult challenges to solve with your very unproven platform technology. So I'd say those are the pluses and the minuses of my experience in working with technologies.
It's a really high bar. It's like, look, here's our toughest problem. You as a small startup try to solve it. It's
we haven't been able to get an antibody against this target in any method. Maybe your brand new nascent way of developing antibodies can do this. Yeah.
But I like this angle in the end, because what you can do is, as an entrepreneur, you can be creative around the different agreements and licensing that you can put in place, right? So you can make everybody happy, and you can secure a future for your company with this important move.
But it is important to make sure you're using your human capital in the best way, and you just don't take on every project and get spread too thin.
Ivan, do you want to add anything to this difference between how we look at platform or enabling technologies versus the more traditional ones?
Right. Well, maybe just to point that this particular question, right, was concerning, as an example, technologies like disease models that enable preclinical evaluation of new therapeutics. This is something completely different. Maybe in our case, we wouldn't be focusing on that as an investment, right, case. But if you, I don't know, just what Megan just mentioned, if you look at the technology that enables delivery of a biologic drug inside the cell, look at the Biont, the company that has just got, I think, acquired by what Sanofi was the deal. They help biologics to get inside the cells. I mean, that creates so many opportunities, and that is a totally different type of enabling technology. So I think it's really important that if you work on such a technology, then you pick a fund for whom this particular application or the breadth of these applications would be in scope, right? It's quite important. And but then the second question, whether we as an investor we like platform technologies versus standalone therapeutics, of course we do. And maybe there's one particular feature about INCEF why we love that. We have a 20-year fund cycle that is very different from that of many other funds, right? And we're not urged to jump out in search of liquidity. Therefore, if we see that there's more room for value creation, it can be expensive. We're happy to invest in such a platform approach because it gives us more optionality. But of course, there's different investors, there's different mindsets. Some go for asset-centric approach and don't really invest in platform technology. So maybe a message to the entrepreneurs: really do your diligence on, say, whom you're contacting with this proposal, because it may be a good fit or it may not be a fit.
And to get back to this specific, oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, I was going to get back to the specific question, Ivan. I think that's following up on Ivan's point about novel disease models. I think you have to think about what your company is going to grow up to be, right? Because in this case, in your wildest dreams, what does this company look like, or who's going to acquire you? Is this going to be like Jackson Labs is going to acquire you, and what kind of transaction is that going to look like? What you see a lot of companies doing is they start with a platform for maybe discovering new AI approaches to drug discovery, or I don't know, pick your different way of evaluating a way to help pharma. Is that often in the end they become a therapy, they pivot to become a therapeutics company, because nobody values their platform and the value that it can bring to drug discovery as much as the people that are starting the company. And the therapeutics companies are valued higher. And so this is how they eventually go out and get their Series A, is they have a path towards developing therapeutics.
Thanks. And
I
was just, go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I think that really hits on one of our kind of common themes throughout this panel, which is really, what are the business objectives, right? What kind of business do you want to grow up to be? Are you a therapeutics company? Are you a platform technology company? And then how do you think about your business objectives, both from investment and business development and partnerships, to get you there along that path? And that strategy will evolve over time as the company grows. But I think, putting some thought into the long-term objectives as well as the shorter-term objectives to get you there, to really augment the day-to-day science that's really going to be the foundation for this. That's a really great combination. And I think making sure that you're thinking through all of those aspects, talking to people that have, entrepreneurial experience and expertise. In an ideal world, investors that you have as part of your initial syndicate can help provide that kind of feedback. I think one thing that's really great about what we're calling traditional VCs here is that you guys have been through the company building process so often and have experts that can help contribute, their thoughts to how to build a business case effectively, that even if you're primarily a scientifically minded founder, you can really get people to come in and help shape this vision for you, members of your board, friendly consultants. And I think it's really those aspects that all come together that help address a lot of these questions.
Thank you. And maybe we can move on to a couple of other topics. And we haven't talked yet about what companies and entrepreneurs should not do, but Chris briefly mentioned that it's important to send a good non-confidential deck as a way of saying, don't come asking for a confidential deck even before you told us what's the name of your company or yourself. So that's an important component. So I wanted to understand from you, what are other things, other pet peeves that you have, and advice that you have for some entrepreneurs and companies that are approaching you on what not to do?
Don't email everybody. Include, you get a really angry email from the head of pharma saying, please take care of this, or from their assistant. It's pretty easy to figure out our code for our email, how we do it with our names, but don't use that as an opportunity to blast everybody in the company in BD&L or in the science arm. If you try to be conscious about the fact of who you're approaching, and panels like this are a good way, or looking at who's doing the outreach is a good way to figure out who to contact, because obviously we're out here doing this because we want to meet people. And obviously if you can find someone who's in your specific zone of where you think your company is, a therapeutic area, or if the company's indicated some preferences, then that's a great way to do it. And on the venture arm, again, this is something like my colleagues can attest to, but some larger venture corporations have people that are more finance oriented and more science oriented. And I think you want to make sure that you're getting the people that are going to hear your message there.
Catello, do you want to go next?
Yeah, just don't bother the managing partner or the GPs with your decks, or with the messages like, I got a breakthrough innovative things. Are you interested, dear? I mean, on our websites, there is a clear page like submit your pitch, right? I mean, what else do you want to do? Right, this is not a good business card for people. I mean, we are very procedural, right, as a VC, and therefore, I mean, just play by the rules. I mean, submit high quality material for us to understand your storyline, where you want to go, which data you generated so far, and we will approach you for sure.
Megan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I might add, and we touched on technologies and platform technologies in particular, and Chris, I think, nicely summarized some of the challenges and opportunities that are there. I think one of the challenges that we see in terms of pitching platform technologies is sometimes folks come to us with those and present it beautifully and lay out the science, and then are sort of curious what we would want to do with it. And I think come to us with what you're looking for, and that will help us get the gears turning about how we might use it. But you want to spoon feed this to a certain degree, make it easy to get your message across, and then we will take that with a grain of salt. And if we have other ideas, we'll put them forward. But come with what you're looking for, so we can really get a sense of what that is and make sure that we don't waste your time if we come up with other kinds of proposals that aren't aligned with your business strategy.
Ivan?
I want to say that actually we really appreciate any inbound request that comes to us, because it gives us stuff to work on, right? But still speaking of if you can somehow make this interaction more effective, better, then I would say research the firm, be specific in your approach and also what you'd like to accomplish in first place. Second, reach out in a way that makes it easy to respond. Provide sufficient information during the initial approach. As Chris said, do not label confidential unless it really is, because for some people, some companies, it may be a really sensitive topic, especially for pharma linked, research, CVC arms. And I think it's also fine, to follow up and be gently persistent and seek frank feedback. Even if there's a pass for us, try to get a meaningful, feedback. Why is that? And if you do it in a polite and nice way, you can actually get quite a lot out of that. You'll understand how to, at least adapt your pitch, or maybe people will recommend you to someone else and so on. So that would be my recommendations.
If I may add to this point, this is a very interesting angle, because we spent a lot of time and effort in order to establish this relationship with the community. I mean, we are no longer in a phase where the VC is in an ivory tower, right? He's not answering to people. You had to be introduced by someone else who had the previous working experience, who is a venture partner, and so on. Here, you submit your request, you receive your frank feedback, and there are people who are reviewing your material. This is 100% guaranteed. It's a lot of work for us, but it's the commitment to ensure that we review everything in order to spot the innovation here, right? So, I mean, this is just to reassure the audience. On the other end, in general, we want to see honesty from the entrepreneur. That means if you submit the data to us, non-confidential, confidential, I mean, guys, we are playing in this business. Tumor density is not tumor shrinkage, right? You have to be solid, okay? So head-to-head data, ensure that you are hitting the highest standard, right? For yourself in a lab and in front of us, because we see these kind of things, right? So it's important for our relationship and for the future, because this is a long-lasting journey that at least is going to last 4 years. And then if we go public, I mean, even more. So it's important that we have this kind of bridge that is between us. Just to mention that.
And maybe to wrap up, we had a last question from Thomas asking why investors are often not responding to proposals. And I think Catello answered to some extent. We obviously try to get to everyone as quickly as possible, but we also have tremendously full inboxes and a lot of stuff to do. So you have to have a little patient and follow up when necessary. But maybe as a closing note, Megan and Chris, do you want to give any kind of final word of advice on how entrepreneurs and companies